Oh boy, I finished my mammoth. I'm so excited. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Sandy, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I have a 1001 book countdown for you, which I'm very excited about. It's a very special one. If you are not familiar with the 1001 book countdown, I will, of course, leave a card up here for you where you can go and check out the original video and see all of the details about it. But basically, I'm reading books off of the 1001 books you must read before you die list, and I'm just working my way through all the books. And, it's not a short project. So hopefully you'll consider giving me a subscribe and stick around as I work my way through this insanity that is this project. But as always, for today, what I will do is put up the numbers, which are 938 and 41. And 41 is, of course, my 2022 number with my 52 pre-selected books. And let's go ahead and get into the mammoth that I read. Yeah, this was my 1001 book club pick for March, and it is, of course, War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. Whew, this is what I would have considered to be the most intimidating book on the entire list. It is one that I have never wanted to pick up, even though it's been on the list. It's one that I have been super scared of, intimidated by, think I just would not be able to get my way through it. And so it turns out that that is pretty far off from what my actual reading experience was of War and Peace. So let's talk first, I want to talk a little bit about the edition. So this edition is called sometimes the P and V translation, because it is Pevier and Volkonsky as far as who did the translation of it. And this particular one is about 1,200 plus pages, and the font in this bad boy is, it's not horrible, but it's not great either. I did pick this one up with the idea of reading it because I like the idea of reading it from a floppy edition. And the bottom line is there are a few things that just really put me off about this particular book. The first one is, if you look at it in the very beginning, one thing to note about War and Peace, if you decide to read it, is there's quite a bit of French in it. And depending on which edition you get, the French is treated differently. So in this particular one, the French is on the bottom. And in this one, there's far more French than in some other editions. And so it really was distracting even from this first page, because this whole first paragraph here is all in French, and so you immediately had to go down here, and it just was very distracting to try and read from this particular edition. So that's the first one I had taken a look at to see if I could read from that particular edition. The second one I took a look at was my beautiful Barnes & Noble copy of War and Peace. This particular one is only around 800 and something pages, and look at how tiny this font is. My eyes are old and I haven't been to the eye doctor in a while. This font was next to impossible for me to read. What's interesting in this one is there's not as much French in this particular version. So this one is, from what I can tell, the mod translation. It is not listed in the book itself which translation it is. But so that is what this one was. And I liked at the beginning just how it started in English. I didn't have to try and translate the first part of the French, and I was able to get right into the story with it. But the font on this one just was really, really tough. So ended up going and finding an audiobook, a digital book, an e-copy of this one. This one is a free one if you have iBooks. It is in the public domain, and this particular version of it you can get without having to pay for it, which is, sometimes I like to do that. I started reading this one on this, and I liked reading from this because I could do sometimes other things. I'll put a picture up of how I put it on my exercise bike, and I can read it while I'm exercising. I may have a slight reading problem when you see that. But this particular version and being a digital copy, the thing I really liked about the digital copy is, I don't think you'll be able to see it, but there's a little star in here. And when you click the little star, it takes you right to the translation. And then when you click back, you can get right back to where you were in the text. And that was something that I also really liked about this one, is that I had the ability to go back and forth. The other thing I had struggled with is sometimes I like to have the audiobook, because the audiobook can help me get through difficult sections. Or if I'm driving to, say, my parents' house, which is not a short drive, I can listen and then come back and catch up in the book. And I could not find an audiobook of this version, of this translation. Now, I didn't necessarily go in depth. There may be one out there. I just could not find one. But what I did end up finding was an audiobook of the mod translation that was with this cover by Thanue Newton, who is, I believe, a British actress. I'm not sure. I'd have to look that up. But her narration of this was so good. She just did a fantastic job of doing all the voices and all of the characters. And so anytime I was stuck, I was able to come out here and listen to this. If you have an Audible subscription, this one is included with your subscription. You don't actually have to use a credit, or I didn't have to use a credit for it. So that is part of it. So I did end up with the mod translation. So for the purposes of today, I, of course, want to hold up my very beautiful War and Peace edition. So a couple of things with this one, as far as like the story goes. The things that surprised me and kind of the misconceptions or things I didn't know. This is about when Napoleon attacks Russia in the War of 1812. I had no idea War and Peace was about Napoleon. That was something that I learned in the very beginning of this book. That part was a really interesting learning for me, and just something I don't know when I would have ever found that out had I not picked this book up to read it. The other thing with this is the story. As far as the story goes, it transitions from, wartime and lots of battles and lots of difficult texts to basically soap opera. This person was engaged to this person, and this person, you fell in love with this person, and this person's not maybe a shady character who's influencing their decision. And it was such a soap opera. It was absolutely amazing to kind of go through those sections. The war sections, I will say that Tolstoy can write a very realistic war scene. And in this time, in this day, those scenes were very difficult. There was one line in here it said something along the lines of, both wanted to talk about peace, but neither thought it was possible. And of course, immediately think of what's going on in Ukraine. And it just was really tough to read a lot of those war sections of this book. And a lot of them were very realistic and very just disturbing, like limbs being cut off and people being shot. And it really pulled you into the war story. So if you are not a huge fan of that, there will be sections of this book that are just gonna drag. They're going to take a long time to get through. The other parts of the story, the drama, the Russian soap opera, some of that is just like, oh, what are you doing? What are you characters doing? Why are you doing that to yourself? And then the other part of the book that was really a struggle for me is that Tolstoy likes to spend numerous chapters on the philosophy of war, on man, and it got very old. About book 13, so there's 15 books and 2 epilogues in this book. About book 13, I was done with that part of it. I just didn't want to read it anymore. It was the part I had a hard time making my way through. The soap opera parts never got old to me, but the philosophy of war and all of that text was really tough. I've seen this a few times on the Discord that I have, that epilogue 2 is probably the worst of it. And because epilogue 1 really closes out a lot of the characters for you, and then epilogue 2 is just this, I don't even know what to call it, just this long drawn out philosophy of men at war. it's just like, okay, I mean, I guess you had the peace side sort of with the closing out of the characters in epilogue one, so you had to close out the war piece in epilogue two, but it was dry and it was slow and it was difficult. So if you kind of go into this, it may not be what you expect. It certainly wasn't what I expected. The other thing is, when you start talking about the characters, so there are a lot of characters in this book. I mean, so many you can't really keep track of them. And what I found really funny is after I was done and I was researching, or not researching, I was looking and playing in my head with what I was going to say, at the very front of this edition, what you actually have in this edition is a list of principal characters. Yeah, that would have been helpful to know up front, because there are a lot of characters that are introduced. There's people that are hard to keep track of. Sometimes they use their first name, sometimes they use their title, sometimes it's almost impossible to keep track of all of the characters in this book. And so what I would say, and what, this kind book told me when I looked at it after I was done reading it, is that there are some principal characters that you really do want to try and pay attention to when you're first starting the book. So the first one is a character whose name is Pierre. He is kind of all throughout the book, and so he's a character you definitely want to keep track of. The Bolkonsky family, Prince Andre or Andrew, depending on what version you have, Princess Mary or Maria, depending again on what edition you have, are characters to kind of keep your eye on. The other one are the entire Rostov family, with Nicholas and with Natasha and Petya. Those are people that you want to make sure you're paying attention to as you're working your way through this. There are a number of other characters who have key roles in this, that have important roles in this. And then there's characters who show up in the beginning and then 13 books later, you're like, well, what happened to them? They never came back, ever. They just never showed up. And so if you have an edition like this one and you can familiarize yourself with some of this, it is helpful. And I wish I would have done that at the beginning, because I think I would have just paid attention to some of the characters maybe a little bit more. The one criticism I have of Tolstoy and his characters is he didn't really write women with depth. All of the women in this are very superficial. Maybe one that's not, which I won't say which one it is, but maybe one isn't, and it is just maddening sometimes. It's like, no, don't do that. But I was, so yeah, that was a bit of a disappointment. I really was, I don't know if I was hoping for more of a development of a strong female character, and there just wasn't. So just a tiny criticism of Leo Tolstoy and this book. But to be honest with you, I was so surprised by how readable it was, how enjoyable it was, how much I didn't struggle to get through it. It took me a little bit over the month. I finished it in like 33 days, and there were days that I didn't want to pick it up, and then there were days that I'd get to a section that I read 100 pages. It just depended on what section I was in. The war sections, very tough. I did find, like I said, if I got stuck, I could listen to it for a little bit, or listen to it and read it, or read it while I was on my bike. And those tended to get me past some of the really hard sections. But overall, it was a much more enjoyable read. I think the length of it and its reputation is super intimidating, but the reality for me was it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Now, having said that, it's not a 5-star read. It's not one that I would go, wow, that's the best book ever written. For me personally, it wasn't. I think most of the people on the Discord are coming back with about a 3.5-star rating for it, right around that, maybe 4-star. And I can definitely see that rating for it. But I really did enjoy it. I would put it probably around the 3.5-star. But if you were thinking about reading this one, just know it's intimidating in length. But it's very, very readable. Far more readable than I thought. You will have sections that are a slog to get through, but for the most part, it was actually far better than I had it being in my head. So yeah, that was War and Peace, my mammoth for March of the Mammoths. Sadly, this only counts for one book on the countdown when it should count for like 4, but it is only one. So, but with that, I do get to go from 9:38 to 9:37, and am going from 41 to 40 because it is on my 2022 list. Cool. I am pleased. I'm so pleased. I actually have one other book that I've finished, but I wanted to have this countdown be solely for War and Peace, being such an important piece of literature and being so big. I wanted to make sure I gave myself enough time to talk about it without it being a 20-minute video. So for what I have coming up, I have started a buddy read or group read of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. We have read the first 4 chapters of this. It's a pretty fast read. I'm having a lot of fun in that group because I learn a lot about this book and about the timeline and about the characters, which has been really fun. But this one is one that I am working on off of the countdown. The one I finished already off of the countdown is Chess Story by Stefan Zweig, which I'll talk about next week. I have my 1001 book club for April, which is Walden by Henry D. Thoreau. And as you can see, I have a bookmark in this. I have about 100 pages left. I have found this to be, a fairly fast read, though I guess after War and Peace, everything feels like a fast read. I'm getting through it considerably faster than I thought I would. And then the last one is The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. And so this is not the edition I held up in my TBR. I have switched already to this one, which is the John E. Woods translation of The Magic Mountain. The other translation that I have, that monster book, which of course I didn't take out, it was very clunky. The translation was hard to read. I just was not enjoying it at all, and I was struggling. So I immediately checked the library and found this one, and was very happy to have found this one. So I have picked this one up. I've read the first 2 chapters or the first 2 sections. There's a tiny bookmark in here, and it's far more enjoyable now that I'm reading this version of it. So yeah, those are the ones that I have in progress. Hopefully you'll see them next week, I hope, but I don't know how many I'll finish next week, maybe 2, we'll see. But that is really the end of my 1001 book countdown wrap up for the week and for the month of March with War and Peace. But as always, like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, everyone, thanks. Bye.